Two things we'll make sure that you leave with are these slides and the guidance note for the document that I'm going to present now. So if you've got follow-up questions, I'm happy to take them now. If the questions arise anytime in the future, come back to us with them. So yesterday I skipped over these. I think I have 3 slides on them, which we can go over quickly. But starting-wise, first thing that we have really been unlucky with and caused a fair amount of confusion. This institutional and context analysis, the acronym for that is ICA. It sounds a lot like it could also mean investment case analysis. So a lot of even our own staff and our own other economists working on this are using the two interchangeably. Probably we should rebrand the ICA. The reason we've called it that is because it's adapted from existing UNDP methodology that uses that term. But if it continues to cause some confusion, it might be worth revisiting. What it is essentially is a political economy analysis. Our investment cases are driven by political realities. We want to find the best options within what's possible, not the best theoretical options. The best options are do not sell cigarettes to anybody in the country. Policy-wise, we're not likely to recommend that, so we want to focus on the political economy of it, because most of the political realities are driven by economic realities. So what we do is we have a companion product to the modeling that you'll do that looks at what are the drivers of the political decisions that determine these diseases. Who holds the power in the decision making? What are the relationships? What do you need to know beyond looking at the epidemiology, beyond looking at the national strategies? What are the hot button issues? What levers can you pull to get things moving? So this is generally, there's some desk research that's done, and you, the economist, for the most part, won't be burdened with collecting and writing this, but it's important that you take the findings into account during the modeling work and data collection that you do. So generally it's done by either a consultant or UNDP. It's a separate document from the main investment case report that we talked about. It generally will have, or it could, if the findings go that way, it could have hotter topics than should be presented to the government. A lot of times we have discussions in the ICA report on corruption, on the way things are actually working, and it doesn't help our overall arguments to be, making these things really upfront with the governments we're trying to convince. So the ICA will be seen by you. It may not be seen by our audience that we're presenting the investment case to, but the findings of it should inform our reports. The audience for this is ourselves, plus the UN team, all the different agencies working in the country. It's probably things they already know, but seeing it and how it relates to NCDs and tobacco control makes sense for them. So what is it really? Underlying the whole principle that we're trying to get with the investment case is really spurring legitimate, sustainable, multi-sectoral engagement on the issues, taking it out of being just a health responsibility to seeing how all these other ministries and all these other stakeholders have an influence on diseases. So that's what we're trying to get to. Everything following from the same mandates that we talked about earlier in this presentation about the 2011 political declaration from the UN, about the FCTC conference of the parties decisions, about ECOSOC reports, UNGA, all stemming from the same mandates, and then flowing into the UN work and our work together and how to pull it all together. Again, the middle one, security support from non-health sectors, is really what we're trying to get at. Finding what the few key achievable realistic policy changes are that would have the most impact, and then who do we need to get on board to make those changes and to implement them. Again, and the reason we're looking at the political economy of it is because those 4 main behavioral risk factors, tobacco, alcohol, diet, physical activity, because those are so enmeshed with commercial and broader private interests that we need to take account of those when doing this. And the way that those private interests affect public sector decisions is also something we need to take into account. If we go into a country and they say, well, the president's chief advisor family has holdings in X tobacco company, maybe we don't prioritize that because it may not go anywhere. Alcohol may be something we can look at first. So it may be these kind of findings that inform our prioritization, our sequencing. We look at really what's achievable, what's practical, and what would have the most sustainable return quickly. But the sort of dance between public interest and private interest is what we're trying to get at here. So how would you use it generally in an optimal sense is what happens is stakeholders fail to take into account how the decisions and policies may exacerbate NCDs. If you're giving subsidies, we've done this in a few countries, we're getting subsidies for sugar, salt, and palm oil. Yes, it keeps people happy, it keeps some people employed, it's a popular policy, but you need to also take into account what happens to your diabetes rate. And if those products were priced according to their actual market value and their health impact, it would be quite different. So we need to make sure, first of all, that the stakeholders we're talking to understand the implications of the decisions and the choices that they make. Second one, the social and economic cost of NCDs unrecognized. Again, it may just be as simple as we've always done these subsidies for sugar, salt, palm oil. If they're popular, you can try to craft an argument that they're pro-poor because the price, effects matter more for lower income populations. In the end, it's part of it's just unrecognized choices that these governments are making. They don't realize they're actively influencing the health. It's part of the job of the investment case to shine a light on that and say, here's where the policy starts, here's where the health is really determined. Then looking at how commercial interests work to ensure that interests are preserved in public policy, making sure that there's not a favoring of either domestic private interest or international private interest, where a lot of times in a trade agreement, we don't get into them as much in the investment case so far, but there is scope to look at trade agreements within the investment case. If a Ministry of Health knows that the country has the ability to use TRIPS flexibilities to issue a compulsory license to help improve health, they could do it. It's within every country's right to do it if there's a health emergency. They tend not to because either the trade negotiators or the government as a whole doesn't want to sacrifice broader trade interests to what they see as narrow health concern. So we need to put these things into the proper context and help say, yes, this trade policy is disadvantaging your economy because of the health impacts of it. So the result is that even the most proven and cost-effective NCD prevention and control policies and interventions can be difficult to first adopt and then second implement. And we can look at both. In Georgia, where we'll go in 2 weeks to finish off our investment case there, it's not about adopting the right policies because it just passed a pretty comprehensive tobacco control law. So it's about what do you do to make sure that the implementation of it is right? Because already, even when the law is passed, the tobacco industry come in and say, well, let's have this policy of it delayed until 2020. Let's have this, let's start slowly with this. So we're trying to help them find the proper way to implement rather than looking at their choices of what they do. This is a busy slide, probably better for you to look at when you're digesting and metabolizing all this afterwards. But really we want to use the ICA to help identify what each country's grand narrative is. What's the main trend, overarching argument in the country that will resonate with all these people. An example is we're just talking about in Georgia, they are really trying to spur their integration into European community. So those are the arguments that really resonate with them. They have a Georgia-EU association agreement that lays out their partnership and their path towards closer integration. One of the paragraphs in that agreement explicitly states that for Georgia to be considered for a closer relationship with the EU, they need to implement in full the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And it's just a little paragraph in a non-health document, but we found that paragraph really creates a strong argument for getting these other sectors to pay attention to the work we're trying to promote. If we say, your EU accession depends on following these policies. That gets us into the door, and we don't have to rely just on a health argument, but it's also a political argument. Other countries have different grand areas. We were in Belarus, where demographic security was a very important consideration, and the high mortality rates of working age men was a really important factor for the government. So even beyond the health arguments, which we make and we don't apologize for, but there's other broader arguments that we can use the investment case as leverage to get these policies into place. So we want to find that grand narrative. Just to recap again, so it's super clear, institutional and context analysis, distinct from the broader investment case, a separate product, short report, about 10 pages, more for internal use, can deal with touchy issues like corruption and different, this ministry tends to get steamrolled by this ministry because they don't have as much influence. This cabinet member's cousin is the prime minister. These kind of things can be in it. If it has those types of things in it, we don't need to share it with the government. It's more for internal use, but it's good. As we're in that first mission in the country, we try to have some kind of a short meeting every evening where we might be during the day having 2 tracks of meetings where the economists would be doing their data collection, meeting with the statistical office, and we're out doing the ICA interviews with different sectors. The end of the night or at the end of the day or a couple of times during the mission, it's good to exchange everything that we're each finding. If you're finding that the real issue is this health challenge, then we can take that into our conversations. And likewise, if we find that there's some political dynamics that need to be taken into account, it's good for you to know that as well. So it's just 2 parts to the same coin, but I'd like to think of it as the investment case, modeling and data collection is the what, and the ICA is the how. And you put them together and you've got a path to get forward. It'll get mixed up and everyone ends up working on everything, but that's the general dividing line between the two and how the two work together. Any questions on it? It's new and not essentially core to what you'll be looking at, so I don't expect a whole lot of feedback on it, but if you have any quick questions on it, I'm happy to answer. Okay, and we've got each other's emails, stay in touch, and when we get out to the countries, it'll all become a little bit clearer. It should, at least. There are a lot of people we work with that it's not clear yet.
Okay.